Welcome to Bigger Together, the power of community, connection, and the commitment, proudly hosted by Young Professionals Group and many of our generous supporters. I'm Mark O'Donnell, President and CEO of Big Brothers Big Sisters of Eastern Massachusetts, as well as a former two-time Big Brother myself. It goes without saying that I wish we could all be together at some wonderful venue to support and celebrate our mission. So I wanted to thank everyone for taking this time out to join us virtually, but I do look forward to seeing everyone at this event next year in person. We choose this date because December 1st is Giving Tuesday, and it's also World AIDS Day. This date represents two global movements, a day designed to activate the power of people to contribute in some way to the organizations they support, and the opportunity to show solidarity with the millions of people living with HIV worldwide, a disease that has permanently affected the LGBTQ community. Many of us have hunkered down. We have navigated the last 10 months in our bubbles. So tonight we felt it was important to shine a light on our community that we serve and discuss the challenges facing our youth and families during these unprecedented times. 2020 has been plagued with a pandemic that has affected the physical and mental health of everyone in some way, education, basic everyday relationships, and for many, insecurities around food and shelter. This past year has brought to the forefront how these issues have been disproportionately felt in communities of color. And this has been a year filled with social unrest. We are living in a time when we are demanding reform to systemic racial injustice. And this comes at a time when we have never been more divided as a nation politically. To reflect on all these issues we just talked about, I would like to welcome our panel of experts. Michelle Goujon is the Chief Operating Officer, first female board chair of the organization, and 25 years on our board before she was elected onto our emeritus board. Roxanne Longoria is the Director of Youth Homelessness Initiative for the City of Boston. And Dr. Richard O'Brien, who's the Director of the John D. Bryant African American Institute at Northeastern University. This is our program. It's going to be best viewed in full screen. And if you have any trouble with the audio or video, please call the help desk at the number being shared. And now, please welcome Omari Arens, who will moderate this conversation. Omari is the founder and managing partner at the Arens Group and the inaugural president of the National African American Insurance Association of Boston. Omari serves the board of Big Brothers Big Sisters of Eastern Massachusetts, and he was recently named one of the 10 most outstanding young leaders by the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce. So without further ado, Omari.
Thank you so much, Mark, and good evening and welcome everyone. I'm so glad to be part of this organization and to lead this important conversation here today with our esteemed panelists. With so much to cover in such a limited time, please feel free to submit any questions that you have using the question and answer feature. Unfortunately, the chat feature has been disabled, but do know that questions and answers that you submit will come to my attention. If we're not able to get to them live, which we might not be able to do given the timing, please rest assured that we will get them answered in a follow-up email to tonight's program. All right, so I think that was my housekeeping note for us. And with that, let's get started. You know, so this year, as Mark laid out in his introduction, it's been an incredible year with all the things that have happened, a global pandemic, the political landscape of us being so divided, the growing awareness of racial injustice. And, you know, as we talked about before, there were issues that were urgent for young people prior to the beginning of the pandemic in March. And I'm curious if each of you would be able to share what you would identify as the most urgent issue for young people and how this year in particular has exacerbated that particular issue. Roxanne, can we start with you?
Sure, thank you. And thank you so much for having me here today. I'm really excited to be here speaking with you all and sharing a little bit of what the Mayor's Office of Health and Human Services has seen over this past year. So I would say that COVID-19 has been particularly challenging for young people experiencing homelessness. If we think about when the gyms, cafes, and libraries were closed, it left young people with nowhere to charge their phones, nowhere to hang out, nowhere to take a quick shower during the day. And for young people who were couch surfing, so couch surfing means that they were staying with different friends and that they were moving around, all of a sudden that wasn't an option anymore because all of the nation went into quarantine. So the city of Boston has really increased the support to this particular demographic by partnering with agencies to increase the number of emergency shelter beds for young people and to provide $100 direct cash transfers for young people experiencing homelessness during COVID-19. But there's always so much more to do, and we're always looking for more opportunities to specifically support this population that's particularly vulnerable.
Thank you so much for sharing that. It's incredibly important work. Michelle, I'd come to you next. What would you identify as the most urgent issue for young people and how that's grown and exacerbated this year?
Okay, thank you. I think what we see on the personal level with adolescents and adults is really dealing with what the pandemic has brought in terms of uncertainty and loss. Uncertainty being what everyone has experienced with their changes in their routines. People went to school, they went to work. Now they're at home, maybe they're at school. They're not doing their team sports. All of the things that were the structures of daily life that brought joy, some frustration, have all now been disrupted completely for everyone. So what that leads to when you don't have control over your environment and your experience is a lot of anxiety. And that's what we're seeing with adolescents, with even really small children. Everyone has had to deal with this disruption. I'd say the other thing that happens with this is the sense of loss. There have been certainly tragic losses of life along with the pandemic. And also we see just in terms of daily life, the loss of being able to see your friends, to have an opportunity just to hang out with people, to be with a team, all of the things that make being a kid a lot of fun and enrich that experience. All of that has been pulled away, and the sense of isolation and loneliness that comes with that is often something that leads to depression and other sorts of things. They're very hard to get out of because everyone at this point has pandemic fatigue and feels they've been in this for a long time. But all pandemics have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and hopefully we're getting a little more towards the end with some of the vaccine announcements. But at this point, we're still in it and we have a ways to go. And being able to support children and families in the work that they're trying to do in this chaotic environment is what we're all trying to do, certainly from the clinical perspective. And as Roxanne said, from all of the other initiatives we have out there, with a big dose of kindness, which everybody needs.
I love that. That's a great perspective, and thank you for sharing that, Michelle. We're certainly going to talk a little bit more about the uncertainty that our young people are feeling as we continue to progress. Dr. O'Brien, I turn to you now. The biggest issue that young people were facing and still are as a result of the pandemic.
Well, thank you, Omari, and I like Michelle's statement of a big dose of kindness. We could all use some of that right now. Good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for having me on this distinguished panel. The most common reason that students leave a university, whether it's to transfer or to drop out, particularly in their first year, is feeling of isolation. And this pandemic has really put the feeling of isolation into overdrive for everybody, but particularly for young people. And one of the things that I think is critical for all of us who have relationships with young people and work with young people and work with the community is to do as much outreach as we can and then do a little bit more, because they need to know we're there. They're feeling a little bit confused right now because they felt like we as adults had all the answers, and we're trying to figure this thing out because this is something that happens once in a lifetime, if not once in a century, and so they're looking to us to help give them some answers and give them some stability, as well as give them the opportunity to be able to come back together and reconnect. At Northeastern, even though we have students on campus, they still feel separated and they still feel isolated because the pandemic is such that you obviously have to do a lot of care with regards to social distancing, and they can't have the usual parties and usual social activities that they are used to accustomed to doing. Moreover, is a lot of them do a lot of volunteer work in the community. And right now it's hard to even be able to do that I mean, they're doing some of it virtually, but it's just not the same as having them there and having them being physically present. So I think attending to this feeling of isolation, particularly as we begin to come out from under this pandemic.
Thank you for sharing that. As a graduate student, I'm certainly getting a lot of those notices myself that are going out to all the university around just the importance of staying physically distant, right, but still being present. And actually, that's a great segue to our next question, which I'd come to you, Michelle and Roxanne, for your perspectives from a health standpoint. You know, the initial danger of COVID-19 really was the physical contact. And that is very much still present, as Dr. O'Brien just laid out for us as well. And we're also recognizing, even in some of the conversation we've already had, the impact to mental health from being apart for what we initially thought was going to be, you know, just a couple of weeks, just a couple of months. And now we're almost, you know, a full year of really operating in this isolation. How would you say that this year has impacted the mental health of young people, and particularly for young people who have intersectional identities, who identify as Black and Latino, maybe Latino and immigrant, maybe immigrant and LGBTQ+, among other identities that they carry? Michelle, could we start with you?
Sure. I think that in terms of looking at the mental health issues, whatever people had going on before the pandemic, it got worse because of the stresses we talked about on issues of anxiety, depression, and stress, and just the environment that people are having to cope with now. That has really increased it. We get reports every day about what's in the emergency rooms, and statewide, I can tell you it's gone from 8 to 10 adolescents in the emergency rooms to right now there's 23. So the demand is up, and that is at the more serious end of the spectrum, people who need hospitalization. But you can imagine in between, with the stress and the amount of need that people have, that there's a lot going on out there. So, and also, I don't want to underestimate the power of people having lots of sleep issues. That the one major destabilization for everybody that we've seen consistently with all these other things going on has been if their sleep gets interrupted for long enough, everything gets way worse, way quick. So I say that because that's something people can generally intervene on and do something about a little more easily, and it has a lot of benefits. But I would say the issue here is if you've got things are getting worse and you don't feel so good, reach out and get some help. The one good thing that has happened with the pandemic is the availability of a lot of virtual help. What we're doing right now, the availability of doctors and therapists, people doing lots and lots of Zoom makes access far easier for folks. So one should not hesitate to reach out and try to get services when it gets to be a little bit too much for individuals or families.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And Roxanne, you had shared earlier about just how services from the mayor's office have pivoted as a result of the pandemic. I'd ask you the same question that I just asked Michelle around, particularly for our young people who have intersectional identities.
Right.
How is that impacting their mental health, and what are the services that we're providing for them?
Well, I first say, I think if you have compounding identities, you know that you do, especially in 2020 with the pandemic. You know, and I think with intersectionality, the great thing is looking at different supports for those different intersections of identity. And also just this has been a really tough year for a lot of people. And when I think about young people in particular, the word that comes to mind is courageous. And so when we think about the mix between a pandemic and then the social unrest that we've been seeing, and the young people making the choice to take to the streets to say enough is enough, Black Lives Matter. I look at them as, you know, they're so much braver than the generations that came before them. And because of that, they should take care of themselves and make sure that they have the support systems that they need to ensure that we're all getting through this together. And by that, I mean, you know, sometimes mental health is thought of as something that we don't talk about, and especially in communities of color. And, you know, it's something that we need to normalize. It's something that we need to talk about within each other. And if maybe reaching out for professional help or a therapist, you know, is something that seems a little bit out of reach, doing something as simple as making a list of things that make you happy and then continuing to turn back to that list whenever you're starting to feel a little down are small things that we can do with young people, that we can encourage young people to do, and that we can also role model for young people during this time, because it's so important that we see each other and everybody as a community, and that we have to get through this together and that we all have to support each other.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. You know, and particularly the word courageous resonates. I was just watching, I think it was Brene Brown's Power of Vulnerability TED Talk, and she describes her definition of courage is to tell the story of who you are with your whole heart. And certainly we see that from our young people who do so with such passion and with such zeal. So that's amazing. And thank you for surfacing that. Dr. O'Brien, you know, there's another word that we often use when we are talking about young people, and that word is resilient. And as you said in your opening commentary, you know, this year has been a lot to process for all of us. And certainly young people look to the caring adults that they have in their lives for answers. And, you know, as you said, most of us as adults, we too are looking for answers, right? We don't have it right now. So, you know, really, how do we help people not lose hope in this moment, particularly young people? And I love what Roxanne just shared with us about young people continuing to lead the way and being really strong and vocal activists. How do we create more opportunities for young people to do that?
Probably, I would say probably the most important thing for young people is to to help get them some semblance of normalcy and some semblance of stability. You know, right now, you know, not only is the general public an uncertain place, but for a lot of them, uncertainty at home and uncertainty in all the things that they're accustomed to having. And I, I I think we as adults, we should probably own more of the responsibility than the young people, and make the extra effort to reach out to them, to talk to them, to ask them how they're doing, to ask them if there's ways that you can be supportive. Because for a lot of them, they don't know the right questions to ask. And for some of them, they may even be uncomfortable asking in this environment for help because they they know, just as we all know, that the struggle is across the board, right? Everybody's feeling the uncomfortable nature of what we're dealing with. Additionally, and I know it seems a little bit abstract, but I think as the political environment begins to settle down, it'll help to settle down, I think, a lot of the other things that we're contending with. You know, the uncertainty about when the schools are going to open and if they're going to open, are we going to be safe? And I think they really need to hear some strong leadership being very clear about what's going to be done, how we're going to do it, what the challenge is, and being honest and being able to make not just young people but everybody feel like there's some semblance of normalcy or some semblance of stability around us. And I think for young people, resilient is the perfect word for them. They'll bounce back, right? They'll recover. But the question becomes, how will they recover? How will they feel once they've come through all this? You know, will they give up on, you know, their education and feel like it is really not worth it? You know, and trying to encourage them, support them, and reassure them that there will be a brighter day.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. You know, I agree with you. I think the young people will bounce back. And I think that young people certainly will help us as adults as well find some of the stability that we need as we're going through this pandemic and coming to the other side of it together. Yeah. We, you know, started off this conversation with thoughts on really kind of the perfect storm of the issues that this year has elevated, and just how many urgent issues there are out there. Thinking about loss and uncertainty, thinking about anxiety, thinking about the social isolation as well. I'm curious if you all have a perspective on what's needed. Help us see what's needed to close the gaps that we've been talking about today. What kind of resources do our young people need right now? And maybe Roxanne, if we can start with you, then we'll go to Michelle and close with you, Dr. Bryant.
Sure. I was smiling because as you're saying that, I was thinking we need to connect the dots for young people. So that, that's literally what was in my mind as you're talking about what resources are needed, is that. And even more so this year, and COVID has made that even more apparent for me, is that we need to create a roadmap of support, and that everything needs to be low barrier, and that we have to see things from a youth perspective. And the reason that I say that is because with the initiatives that we've been doing from the mayor's office, like the direct cash transfer or Thanksgiving care packages, we're noticing that if we make resources available to young people and that they know how to access them, they will access them. And so we as adults who have all of these resources around us and availability to provide that for a young person, and I know that this is cliche to say, but be the person that you needed whenever you were younger is so true, and especially for this demographic of young people that I work with in particular, which is young people experiencing homelessness. And you think about the different anchors that a young person needs to a community to be successful and to be supportive and to be empowered. We need to be that for the young person. And so I would say that if anything, that's what 2020 has shown me with young people, is that as much as possible, we have to be that bridge for a young person, because we have that power to be able to do that for them.
Be a bridge for young people. I love that. It's a great place. We're gonna bridge now to Michelle and see what she has to offer us. Michelle, what would you say on this question?
Well, I agree with everything that Roxanne outlined. I think that her characterization of courageous is exactly right. This is the generation that didn't get their proms, they didn't get their graduation celebrations. They missed a lot of the things that make our youthful experience really, really special. But yet they have done pretty well, and they did what they could do, and demonstrates a tremendous strength. I think that they need to continue with that and be very aware of their own self-care, take care of their internal energies, spend time with people who help, less time with people who are problems, have other activities, get some sleep, and try to have a perspective that this will be over. The bad part will get over. And in thinking about that on the way to it, reach out for help if you need it from all of the adults who hopefully are trying to make this easier. But also take a look at your primary care doctor and other people in that environment. The good thing in the pandemic has been stigma took a big step back. There's no stigma associated with needing to talk to a behavioral health practitioner, to trying to get some issues on the table for discussion. There are more and more people realizing that this is a tremendous benefit and they can really make use of it to enrich their lives. So do that. And in the meantime, wear your mask, stay 6 feet apart, and get ready for the vaccine. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we definitely have seen many, many more resources around stigma, and especially targeted to communities of color, as Roxanne had mentioned earlier, that really have struggled with stigma around mental health and therapy and counseling. And so that certainly has been a silver lining. Dr. O'Brien, we'll turn to you to close out this portion of the program on this question of what are the gaps and how do we fill them?
Yeah, and I would concur with Roxanne and Michelle and all that they have outlined. And the last thing that I will say as a resource is they need human resource, right? They need us to be in their lives. They need us to be present. They need to know that we're here and that they can feel comfortable reaching out to us, or that they'll feel our presence by us reaching out to them. In addition to that, information is an incredibly important resource. Accurate information helping them to know, what's happening with this virus, what's the truth about the vaccines, and what's the importance of the social distancing and protecting themselves, and the impact that they can have on their families if they're not being careful. One of the things that we see at the college level is you get students who are a little bit confused, or don't even want to pay attention to what the reality is with regards to being safe and taking risks, and the kind of impact that can have. And I know a lot of times young people just think about how it affects them individually. When you help them understand how it can affect them, how it can affect their families, how it can affect their friends, how it can affect their communities, then they can begin to see and understand how this stuff plays out. In addition to being at Northeastern, I'm also a member of Concerned Black Men of Massachusetts. And one of the things that we've been trying to do with the young people that we work with is to make sure that each of us take time to call and reach out to one another, talk to them, talk to their parents, find out how they're doing, find out how their school situation is. Right, a lot of young people are home, and this distance learning is really a challenge. And I think we as adults have to prepare ourselves for this transition, because there's a learning and knowledge gap that I have to overcome as a result of this 8 to 10 months of what's not the normal learning process for a lot of young people. And so they, again, it's important for them to know that we're here. It's important for them to feel our presence and to know that, as was said, that we will get through this, right? We'll get to a brighter day, and that everyone will be better for it, but they need to know that we're going to help them continue to grow, continue to progress.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that the importance of staying present is something that all three of you have really outlined for us. Michelle, Roxanne, Dr. O'Brien, thank you so much for joining us for the first portion of this program. What you shared with us has really helped to lay out the landscape of what young people are facing, really not just in Boston, really across the board. And that's going to really set us up well for the second half of our conversation. So thank you all so much for being with us for this first part.
Thank you, Omari.
Thank you.
Thank you, Omari.
I put a resource in the chat if anybody wants to check it out.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Yes, thank you. I see that come through here. So we're gonna play a brief video, and then we're gonna return with our second panel in just a moment. So stay with us.
Hey, what's up? Kevin here from Big Brothers Big Sisters. Even though this coronavirus pandemic has separated us physically, it has not separated us virtually.
I talked to my little sister, Manara, the other day, and it was so fun to see her face.
Though it's not the same as the in-person connection, it still really makes my day, and I think it makes her day as well.
Every time we talk, I constantly remind him to stay on top of his homework.
Be present and at that moment and focus on your relationship.
I know that this coronavirus can be scary.
Just know this is just temporary. That's all it is.
This is just a bump in the road, and there's a whole highway ahead of us.
Other than that, I just say, I believe in you.
We're in this together. We're going to get through it together as a community.
We just got to use this time to strengthen each other, and we're doing that.
Well, that's all I got. How do I hang this thing up?
I love that video, and every time I see it, it always makes me smile. So great to hear from some of the bigs in our program and the encouragement that they're providing to our young people. For our second part of the conversation, it's my pleasure to introduce this next conversation and welcome to our virtual stage, Raquel Rodriguez of the Lawrence Lynch Corporation, a big sister, and also a member of the board of directors for Big Brothers Big Sisters of Eastern Massachusetts. Welcome, Raquel. Also going to welcome Terry McCarron, our Chief Program Officer. There's Terry. Hi, Terry. And Mark O'Donnell, who you heard from earlier, our CEO. Mark, welcome back to the stage.
Thank
So
you.
good to be here with the three of you, and thank you for joining as we reflect on what we heard in the earlier conversation and think about really what does that mean for our agency. And so we'll do this just as a conversation. I think the biggest question that is likely on people's minds is how did we move, how have we had to pivot, and how did we move so many matches from what has traditionally been a face-to-face mentoring program to engage virtually in the course of the pandemic. And I think, Terry, you probably have the closest perspective on that. Why don't we start with you? How did we move the agency's, I think, 4,000 matches to being virtual this year?
We did. It was a massive undertaking. I'll tell you what, Omari and Raquel, why don't I talk about kind of the experience being inside the organization, and then I'd love to hear from you as Biggs afterwards about your experiences being in matches as this was happening, and what your experience was like from your perspective. But I'll tell you, for those who don't know me, I've worked for Big Brothers Big Sisters for a long, long time. And, working at Big Brothers Big Sisters, which is a really excellent agency, felt like riding on a roller coaster that was clicking uphill, always making progress and incrementally getting better and better every single day. And in March 2020, we crested and we started to zoom downwards. And what really resonated with me from the first speakers was Dr. O'Brien saying, this idea of having to have answers. We did go through a period of really deep reflection in March to say, who are we in this time? What does our program, which was largely predicated on being together in person, mean in an era where people had to be social distant from one another? And like all good nonprofits, I think our first instinct was to go to our constituents, to hear directly from our awesome guardians who are great supporters of our agency, to hear directly from youth who are in our program, and we want to advocate that they become leaders, and obviously wanted to connect with our volunteers to understand their perspective. And we gathered input from them all and combined what we were learning from talking to our constituents with feedback from the CDC and the Executive Office of Health and Human Services, and came up with reasonable guidelines for how we expected matches to engage one another that was tailor-made for each individual match. And so, we had a tremendous amount of success moving our matches online, having Zoom calls just like this one that we're having tonight. And I think a big part of the reason we had that success is that we had already heard directly from our parents. We knew exactly what platform they wanted to be meeting on, what their COVID comfort level was. And we drew a lot of inspiration from hearing directly from our constituents. And so of our 4,000 matches that you mentioned, many moved on to an online format. Some still did meet in person, but we made sure that they were following the strict guidelines by the CDC. The other things that we asked to do is we kind of changed up our format and the structure of our program. We increased the frequency with which we expected mentors and mentees to see each other. We felt like with all that was going on in the world, with such rapid change and uncertainty, that more frequent touch points between a mentor and a mentee made a lot of sense. And the other thing that we really tried to focus on, Omari, and the rest of the panel, is that we wanted to introduce more direct curriculum. Because as everyone knows, while the pandemic was going on, it was pointing out some pretty stark realities about racial injustice and about social injustice. And so we really tried to create activities that mentors and mentees could do together online, where we were engaging around specific conversations on racial justice, civic engagement, and self-care. And so those were really important components of what we wanted to do. And the last couple pieces I wanted to mention is we really tried to focus on referrals. We know that our program is about self-actualization, defending the potential of young people. But really what we wanted to do is continue our mission, but also meet families where they were. And so our match support team, the team in our agency that's reaching out to families and talking with guardians and littles and bigs every single day, they were making thousands of referrals and finding resources for families that might be experiencing insecurity, anxiety, or stress, and some of the items that were mentioned in the first panel. And so we also became a referral agency, working closely with collaborators and partners to make sure that families had necessary resources that they could access. And then lastly, this was a really difficult time for our staff, and we needed to focus on the self-care of our people. And they needed to put on their own oxygen mask first, cope with having their family at home, or cope with losses they were experiencing in their life, so that they could bring their whole selves to their work, which is what was required of them during this time. And so from an inside perspective, that's what I felt like we were experiencing over the last 10 months. We changed more in the last 10 months than we had in the previous 10 years. I think that's a fact. And I'm really curious how mentors experience that, how our bigs experience that. So I'm wondering if I could ask you, Raquel, what was your experience as a big, and how did you experience the last 10 months?
Hey, Terry, thanks. Well, first and foremost, I have to say it was really helpful to me to hear the first three panelists, because many of the themes that they discussed, I've experienced many of those themes with my little, and I can get into that a little bit later on. But it has been a challenging year. My little is economically disadvantaged, and over the past 3.5 years, I've tried to expose her to activities to broaden her perspective. We've done some really cool things like zip lining, and I've taken her to some theater shows in Boston and college visits, and we can no longer do those things. So I've employed a hybrid model to my mentoring experience. And, we do some virtual stuff online, and like tomorrow I'm going to take her to lunch for 45 minutes, very quick, outside on a picnic table, and grab some sandwiches. But it doesn't match what we've done in the past. So it's challenging, but I'm hanging in there. I have a question for Omari, if that's okay. Omari, what's been your experience in the Mentor 2.0 program?
That's a great question. What's wonderful about, and probably a little lesser known for most people, the Mentor 2.0 option, is that it's a school-based program, and so I'm matched with a young person at the Boston Green Academy. The program, by its very nature, actually employs technology already, and so in some ways, I think Mentor 2.0 really helped, as Terry was going through his items, right? Like, it really helped us as a total agency to think about, what can we lean on, what can we employ, because there's a curriculum that comes with the Mentor 2.0 program. So we were already communicating with our littles through an online platform. They were filling things out, we were filling things out. And when we came together at least once a month, there was also additional material that was available for us. And so, in some ways, the pandemic didn't alter too much of that. I think we had to introduce more conversation around, how is the shift of not being in the school building going for you and not seeing your friends. And my little in particular has a huge affinity for basketball and really thinks he's going to be the next LeBron James. And so, so not being out there and able to play basketball with his friends was, was really tough. It was one of the things that he really looked forward to about going to school. But we were able to really leverage the technology and the platform that came with the program already, and had great support from the Mentor 2.0 coordinators, and staying in touch with us, feeding us updates as the mentors and bigs on what was happening in the school environment, so that we were just aware of what was being communicated to families about what was happening in the school environment as well. So it was really good in that sense, but still missed our in-person interaction. And as Dr. O'Brien, I think, said in the last panel, right, the generation that's missing graduations, that certainly was true for our students this year. Yeah. On that, actually, Mark, I turn to you, because we've been talking about the perfect storm nature of 2020, right? And the last panel outlined for us the deeper, wider gaps that were pre-existing for youth and for families, in particular for those families that have intersectional identities. What's your insight on how things have changed, from your perspective, from your seat? What has it meant for our partnerships, for schools, for funding?
Thanks, Omari. It's a great question. And I think for the most part, I think Terry actually said it, we have to meet everyone where they are. And the issue is everyone's in a different place. So referrals are a big part of our business also for us to get the kids that join our program. Someone in a guidance counselor's office or community center or a teacher will say, hey, this program exists. I know a lot of students that went through this program. Why don't you think about that? Talk to your guardian about it. That's not happening right now. And when we call the school and say, we know the need is up and we know these kids need us, they're saying, we're trying to figure out our own daily activities. Can you give us a second? So we have to make sure that we are really sensitive to all of the partnerships we have, and that everybody's in a different place. And that goes for guardians and parents and mothers and grandparents. They are all in a different state of thinking about what is next for their life. So we have to make sure that we're doing the best. But first and foremost, we just had to make sure that our 4,000 matches were taken care of. I think Dr. O'Brien said it is they need that relationship now more than ever. And that was our priority. So what we did is we went into kind of a war zone moment where we said, we're going to hunker down and make sure that we can get as many of these kids into a virtual relationship, make sure that we could make sure that we're there for them. So that was our priority. And so we actually stopped saying we're going to grow and serve more kids, and we're going to make sure we take care of the kids that need us the most right now. And the great thing is our donors actually met us where we were. We couldn't hold events. We couldn't go out and see them. We couldn't have, the front-facing conversations with them. So a lot of the times donors would call us and say, I know I didn't attend this event, or I know you're not having this, but we want to make sure that we could help. So I think as a community and a family, the goal was to treat ourselves like an essential employer, an essential service, treat ourselves like this is something that can't go away or even can't pause. So we managed our operation that way. And, we feel for our partners, especially there are some that we know that are one payroll away of closing because they can't keep up. And we are lucky enough, we're not in a position where we could just say we passed this, but we're in a position where, the people here tonight, the people that support us, they have met us where we are. So I think we're in a place where first and foremost, before we think of tomorrow, we have to make sure that we're taking care of today.
Yeah, I love that, Mark. And I think one of the things that came out in that previous panel was really around our young people that have intersectional identities, right? And Raquel, you just mentioned this as well. When you are a person of color and in the LGBT community and experiencing potentially homelessness, or you have some other issues that are going on, it just has hit harder in the pandemic. And, so when you say, Mark, like treating the agency like an essential service, it really is, right? These relationships truly matter. I neglected to mention before, and actually, Terry, I might kick it over to you because the agency, we just had some press about the Mentor Hub app. And Terry and I were just on a call about that, and Mark was just interviewed in the paper about that as well. And so, Terry, I wonder if you might comment on just what Mentor Hub app is and how it's an example of how the agency is continuing to be innovative and introduce new solutions.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Mari. I appreciate the pass. And I want to just back up and just reiterate something that Michelle said in the first segment. The legacy of COVID is going to be a second wave of serious mental health challenges for our young people, especially impacting people of color, especially impacting vulnerable families that are experiencing poverty. I've read a recent report, 27% increase in depressive symptoms in a random sampling of young people. 75% of young people experiencing sleep disruption, something that Michelle just said was central to the rest of your functioning as a person. And so we know there's going to be widespread challenges related to COVID. It's going to be the kind of second wave that we're going to have to cope with as an agency. So it was within that context that we really wanted to try to pursue partners that we could leverage technology and we could leverage evidence-based systems that already exist to be a supplement to the mental health industry. And so, we know we're not counselors and therapists, we know we're not licensed professionals, but mentors can have an incredible role in supporting the mental health field in ensuring the wellness of kids. And the Mentor Hub app is a great example of that. What it does is it puts a mentor and a mentee, it puts a match on the Mentor Hub app. They can both work together. It's a collaborative space. It's kind of a two-way mirror, so a mentor can see the work that the mentee is doing. And the app aggregates self-help systems, things like IntelliCare, Khan Academy Kids, proven evidence-based online learning systems and self-improvement systems that kids can use. And the kicker is that if a mentor is there to encourage and support a young person, then those online systems become 2 to 3 times more likely to be effective. And by the way, things like IntelliCare and Khan Academy Kids and Super Better, those online apps are competitive with in-person therapeutic treatment. They have about the same effect size if they're used with fidelity. But what's required is mentors to help youth follow through and use those apps. And so the Mentor Hub apps allows there to be a point of support and a point of accountability from mentors towards mentees and helps them use the apps. And what's great is, we know we can improve the effectiveness of apps, and also the apps will improve the effectiveness of the mentoring relationship, that we'll get 2 times, 3 times the delta on a mentoring relationship when we combine technology with the power of a relationship that's built on trust. So we're really, really excited about that opportunity to kind of innovate and to seek other partnerships. And I wanted to pass it to Raquel, because I know, we were talking about kind of collaborating and partnerships and seeking out, collaborators that can help us improve our services. And I think this came up in your match recently where Big Brothers Big Sisters was able to find an important referral for you.
Absolutely. This past summer, I received a call from the Department of Social Services because my little was experiencing housing insecurity. And so I relied on my Big Brothers Big Sisters match support to help me navigate this situation. And I wouldn't have been able to be helpful without that match support. Omari, I have a question for you as a fellow colleague who's a board member of color. What would you share about the agency's response and commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think even as we heard tonight in the introduction, right, it is certainly part of who we are and the work that we're doing. I think the mission statement on our website says diversity, equity, inclusion are core values, and that's certainly not just talk. It's part of the board's commitment to the organization. It's part of the leadership team's commitment, as Mark and Terry will share. I think Julia McCarthy, who's the chair of the board's diversity committee, has been doing some incredible work with Nick Ramos, who's the chief people and culture officer. And it's something that's really supported throughout the entire agency. I think what we've seen this year in particular is a number of conversations that really addressed race head on. A good moment to shout out the Big Ambassadors team, and I know a number of them were on and watching for helping to create some differentiated programming, and to Caroline Krantz for her leadership of that group as well. And so the agency continues to push forward, and really exciting, if you've been following any of the news in the last 2 weeks, Big Brothers Big Sisters of America actually just announced a new CEO, Artis Stevens, who's the agency's first Black CEO. And he brings an incredible amount of experience. He and I have already chatted a little bit on LinkedIn, and I'm really excited about what he's going to bring to the agency as a whole, and how we'll feel that impact here in the greater Boston area. Mark, would you add anything about how the agency continues to make great progress around diversity, equity, and inclusion? Oh.
I think I spoke with you and Dr. O'Brien a couple of days ago, where the best answer is that you don't have all the answers, that we're learning every day. What we know is that we feel we're starting from a place of helping people, and we're helping people in communities of color, and we're also building bridges between many different cultural backgrounds or identities. And we have to make sure that we are up to that task, and that our staff and our match support are telling our bigs and littles that we are up to that task of making sure we're saying and doing the right things in the community. So we are going to go down that path and get better and better at learning. We think we're not in a bad place right now, because our goal is to help. So what we're trying to do is gather as much information, tap into the national network, use the services, like you said, with Julia McCarthy at State Street, and use as many resources to gain as much knowledge to be leaders in this space. So that's the goal, is to be a leader in this space and make sure that when we send bigs and littles and staff and ambassadors and donors into the community to advocate for us, that they're saying and they're preaching the message that we want them to. So it's a long journey.
Indeed, I would thank you for sharing that, Mark. And Terry, I wonder if you might, one of the things that Dr. O'Brien talked about on the last panel was the resiliency of our young people, right? And just what you think about in terms of the isolation that has introduced a counter and created its own crisis of mental health. And just the importance of us needing to stay connected, which is really the nature of the work that we do through the agency. What feedback have you gotten from the littles in our program around like how they're doing and how we're supporting them?
Absolutely. I got to say, youth are amazing. They're digital natives. The idea of making the leap from going out and throwing on a football or doing an art project together to meeting together online and finding interesting and innovative ways to be in relationships with other people, despite the barriers that exist, has been incredible. And it's such a testament to young people that they've been able to transition through this time and meet their mentors where they can meet them. In an overwhelming majority of youth being able to do that. And that's just the ways in which young people are displaying resiliency with us directly as an agency. What we're also hearing is that a lot of young people are becoming caretakers in their home. They're supplementing the parenting that's happening. 81% of our families are single parent homes. Older siblings in those homes play a critically important role in making sure those families can function. It's both the greatest thing and something that's so admirable, and also becomes a point of stress for young people that we have to manage and support for them, because we don't want to parentify young people. We know that there's some real risk in doing that. All the same, it's so amazing to see young people stepping forward and becoming caretakers, and also wage earners for their family. A lot of young people trying to join the workforce and figure innovative ways to be earning resources for their families. And also young people that seek out resources and support. This is a true story. Less than an hour before we got on this call, I was talking with a staff member, and one of the youth that they work closely with called us up and asked if they could get a tree for their family for Christmas because their family couldn't afford one. And they said, I'm going to call around everyone I know until somebody will help me with this, because I don't want my younger siblings to not have a tree on Christmas. And so we are so inspired by the young people that we come into contact with, and feel so honored to be able to work with families that are fighting every single day to survive and to thrive in this circumstance. And so we'll stop there and pass it back to you, Omari. And I don't know if anybody wants to contribute more on the topic.
No, but I think,
turn it to you, Mark. Yeah.
Yeah, we're getting down to the last 5 minutes, and I think it's really important. The theme of tonight is bigger together. And I think what I want to do is it's been an amazing discussion, and I do think this agency is better together. And I think if you look at the moms, the guardians, the grandparents, the bigs, the littles, the board members, the donors, the young professionals, it is a true village to do what we do. So bigger together in this format means to me that we're going to come out of this with more knowledge of what the new, not the new norm, what the new issues are in the world, and what the new, where people need the most help from us, and the new virtual platforms and all the things we're learning we have to use for good, and our DEI roadmap, all of these factors that are coming out of this perfect storm we have to use for good. So I think we're going to take together, we're going to take all of the knowledge we've learned over the last 10 months, and we're going to put it to use moving forward. So I look forward to taking what we've learned and pushing it forward. So I'm going to ask each of you, bigger together, what's your one takeaway from that term? Omari, why don't you start with you?
Sure thing. Yeah, I think I love what you said earlier about the agency being an essential service. It's been such a great conversation, both of the panels. And what I say to people all the time who ask me about why I'm involved with Big Brothers Big Sisters is that there are a lot of solutions in the space, and this is certainly not a space that can have too many solutions. We probably need even more than what we have now. But what I really like about Big Brothers Big Sisters, and what inspires me to be part of this and be part of this work, is that you're not just employing a temporary solution that goes from grades 3 to 12 or anything like that. What you're really building is a lifelong relationship of an additional caring adult. These young people become part of our families, and we become part of theirs, and our families become part of their families. And so it's such a powerful and very special relationship. And as you said, Mark, agency is not perfect. We know we have more work to do. And we need some people who can help us do that work. So that'll be my quick plug to go to emasbigs.org and sign up to volunteer and be matched with a wonderful young person today.
How about you, Terry?
Sure, thanks, Mark. I would say, when I think about Big Brothers Big Sisters, I think about an adult taking the time to examine, to get to know, to support, to ignite, to defend the potential of a young person. In order to be able to do that work, you need to be able to look that young person in the face and tell them they matter. And in the world that we live in now, what's more important than that?
Great. And Raquel?
Well, I'm just going to speak to why the connection to the agency is important to me personally right now. I'm very concerned about my little. She's incredibly smart and gifted and talented and wonderful. And I'm concerned about her being stimulated academically with online learning. I'm concerned about her family situation in regard to food and economic insecurity. And I need the support of Big Brothers Big Sisters more than ever right now. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you. And with that, I want to just say to everyone that you've heard, and I'm going to use the essential service again. Our service is needed now from what you heard tonight more than ever. And I thank you for your support. It means a lot to get to these kids right now, and you're doing a lot out there to help. And I appreciate that. We appreciate that. So on behalf of all of us, the agency, I'd like to thank all the panelists and Omari for moderating such an amazing, important conversation. To all of you who have joined us, thank you for spending the time and to learn about the youth, their families, and our community. And to learn a little more about how you could help, I'm going to welcome Jennifer Dwyer, part of our Young Professionals group, to share more about how you can get involved. Again, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Mark. Representing the Young Professionals group, we're absolutely thrilled to have been a part of this informative event and really look forward to keeping these important conversations going. As you reflect on what you've heard and honor Giving Tuesday, we'd like to highlight a few ways that you can get involved with Big Brother Big Sisters, such as donating what you can financially, volunteering your time by applying to be a Big, or by joining the Young Professionals group. To learn more about these opportunities, you can take a picture with your phone to scan the QR codes that are on your screen, or you can visit our website at emasbigs.org. Again, thank you all for your time today. We look forward to gathering in person in the future, and this concludes today's event. Thank you.